Welcome back to This is VANCOLOUR. Housing is expensive, and maybe I'm a cynical curmudgeon, but I'm not convinced that any elected official is even interested in reducing the market price of homes or even the cost of rent. Here to restore my faith in our leaders, or maybe fuel my cynicism, is a returning friend of the show, a contributing editor to Maclean's magazine. You can also find her in The Walrus, The Tyee, and Canadian Business. She is Michelle Cyca, and this conversation is supported by Shelter Point Single Malt Whiskey, distinctly Vancouver Island, uniquely Shelter Point. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Mo.
So nice to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
I got this big problem with the whole housing discourse, particularly on the political level. I feel like every politician is talking about how they want to make housing more affordable, but they forget the part where they have to reduce everyone else's home value and equity in their own home in order to bring down prices. So I want to ask you, you've covered this quite extensively. Do politicians actually have an interest in making the market price of home ownership more affordable?
I mean, I think they would like to imagine they could do that without sort of flattening prices, but that's impossible because, like, I'm not an economist, but I think anyone can understand that part of the problem with the housing market is that housing is scarce. There's not enough of it. People compete for it. Mm-hmm. And we need to build a lot more. But if we build enough for everybody, that's going to cool the market. It's going to bring prices down a little bit, or at least flatten them out. And so people who've been betting on the value of their home continuing to go up the way it's gone up rapidly in the last 15 years are going to be disappointed by that. They're not going to like it. And we're still in a state in Canada where there's more homeowners than renters. It's about 60-something% now. And also homeowners tend to be older. Older people tend to vote more. Politicians really don't want to alienate wealthy, older Canadians.
Right.
So they don't want to do anything to affect their wealth, their retirement. So they keep saying that they're going to just build more housing, but it's sort of abstract, like where they're going to build it and how it's not going to affect other people's values. We see this in Vancouver every time there's like a proposed apartment building in a residential area. People start complaining that it's going to bring their home value
The value
down.
of their home down. Yeah, right.
And that's considered a legitimate reason to oppose housing for other people. So it's just, it's this like constant question of where are you supposed to build it? Like Doug Ford is arguing he should be building it in the Greenbelt, which was formerly like protected land, build some single family homes out there as if that's going to fix the crisis, So,
but in fairness, isn't our, certainly Vancouver's economy, but I think even our national economy is so tied to housing, particularly in the financialization and the commodification of housing, where if suddenly you start to have mortgages underwater or just a big reduction in home prices or home values, it could tank the entire economy, right? Like we're kind of stuck.
Yes, we're super over-reliant on housing to prop up our economy. And in many ways, like the GDP and the sort of growth and financial health of the country is artificially dependent on real estate, right? We kept inflation rates really low and interest rates really low so that people could borrow these giant mortgages to buy more housing. And now everything is really dependent on that. I think 1/5 of our national wealth is in housing, and real estate is the biggest sector of our economy. So nobody really wants to disrupt that.
So ultimately, the dream of owning a home is going to be increasingly more and more inaccessible.
Yeah.
Like it's not going to be more accessible. It's not going to be, we're not going to get prices to a level where like, if you save up, a reasonable amount, you can buy a home.
Exactly. Because, for much of the 20th century, Canada started building a lot of housing after World War II. And there was a lot of federal investment in housing until the early 80s. And at that time, you sort of had the price of housing track more or less with income. So as people's incomes rose, the price of housing rose, but they were tracking each other. And that's really stopped. So incomes have grown much more slowly than real estate. And what that means is if you got into the real estate game a long time ago, your wealth has gone up. You can continue buying housing and selling housing. But if you're left behind on that curve, if you're just trying to save enough money to buy a place in Toronto or Vancouver without pre-existing housing wealth or generational wealth, you're pretty screwed. Like there's just no real way in.
And so that's bad enough. But I also feel like politicians don't have an inherent interest to even make rent more affordable. if only for the reason that so many of them own rental properties and are earning side income from this rental property. So why would they want to, why would they want to cut their income in half?
Exactly.
For Canadians, I guess.
The MP for Vancouver Granville flipped something like 33 properties in the last 10 years. I mean, and I think if you go to the Maple, they have a great database on this where they've tracked all the MPs who have an investment in housing. It's 38% of our members of parliament are landlords or they own investment properties. So that's a pretty large segment.
And it's across political parties, right?
Across political parties, yeah. Every political party has members who are involved in the financialization of housing who have a stake in that. And, I think since the federal government withdrew from investing in purpose-built rental and social housing, which was in the early 80s, and they've never really reinvested, it became a provincial responsibility, as Justin Trudeau reminded everybody recently. There just hasn't been a lot of rental stock. So the assumption is, people can buy condos and rent them out. They become small mom and pop landlords. And we're now at a point where more investors are buying real estate than first time buyers. Because again, you have that compounding effect. If you already own real estate, it's easy to buy more. And that doesn't work because people want to maximize the profit of their investment. So they have an incentive to evict renters if their rent is below market.
Right.
They do rent evictions, or they say they're going to move into the suite, or they just sell the unit and then the new owners want to move in.
Right.
So there's very little stability for people renting in that system. And there's a lot of incentives for people to prioritize greed over creating livable conditions.
And so basically what I'm hearing is that the people who are in charge keep telling us that they have all the solutions to fix these issues, especially if they're an opposition party, right? Like, oh, the current government is bad or the past government was terrible. But ultimately, they don't have an interest in reducing the cost of home ownership or the cost of renting. No, is that a fair assessment?
I think that is a fair assessment. I think they would like...
So we're screwed. Like, there's no hope here.
I think we're pretty screwed. I think the best hope is... honestly, for renters to mobilize and recognize their kind of collective interest. And we're seeing in Toronto, there have been rent strikes. In Montreal, there was an amazing story about one woman who refused to move out of her apartment after a developer bought the building. I think we're starting to see a real sort of class war emerging between renters and landlords.
Does that lend itself to a political space where a party can come in and almost be like the party for renters, whether it's provincially or federally? I
think so, yeah. And I think to some extent the Conservative government or the Conservative Party is appealing to that. There's a disenfranchisement, especially among younger generations who just see that the economy has gotten worse, that their prospects have gotten worse, that they probably are never going to own a home in their lifetime. And you can really mobilize that anger, I think. You have a lot of resentment against people who came into their adulthood at a totally different time in the country's social history and were able to get secure jobs and pensions and homes, and none of that is left for...
They're mobilizing that anger, but their solutions, again, don't speak to what has to be done, which is reducing the value of land, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I think all politicians play from the same playbook. We see this municipally, provincially, federally, where they make a lot of promises to change things to get elected.
Yeah.
Then once they're in office, they're more reluctant to actually put those into progress, right? They start saying we're going to do some studies, we're going to do some public polling. Eventually we'll get around to it. And then by the next election cycle, they can promise they're going to fix the problem again.
Right.
And in the meantime, they can just blame the last party who was in power for all the problems. So the Conservatives blame the Liberal Party, the Liberals blame the Conservatives, the NDP can blame everybody.
Yeah.
It's, they're just passing it around.
Well, Michelle, I appreciate this very cynical conversation. I think you have grounded us in reality when it comes to a lot of the political promises or sloganeering when it comes to housing in this country. So I appreciate your time tonight. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Folks, one of my favorites, she is Michelle Cyca. Big thank you to Shelter Point Single Malt Whiskey for supporting local conversations and local content, even when it gets spicy and cynical. Now up next, I am the most bleeped political commentator in British Columbia, and I'm going to prove it. Up next.